What's up, everybody? Dave here. Just want to remind you that this episode of Tales from the Backlog is brought to you by the patrons of The Tube. Personal heroes of mine, such as Chris Nelson and the Top 3 podcast crew, have gone to patreon.com/realdavejackson to support The Tube, and they're getting some cool treats in return. You can be like them and head to patreon.com/realdavejackson, and you will be my hero too. All right, let's get to the show. Hey everybody, my name is Dave Jackson, and you're listening to Tales from the Backlog, where each week I'm joined by a guest to talk about a game we played. My guest today is a returning friend of the show and Corvid enthusiast, Jamie Lohkamp. Welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
Yeah, for those who have been with the show for a long time, Jamie was a guest on the Silent Hill 2 episode, which is still one of my favorite discussions that I've had on the show. So if you haven't listened to that, this is October. Go back and listen to that. It's another horror game. But today we're going to be talking about The Last Door, seasons 1 and 2, which is a point-and-click adventure horror game developed and published episodically by the Game Kitchen from 2013 to 2016. Jamie, if you had to give an elevator pitch for The Last Door, what would you say?
So my elevator pitch was make a Lovecraftian horror game with the least amount of pixels.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I was trying to think of how to say it, and you did it for me. I wrote down an old school point and click inspired by H.P. Lovecraft that understands H.P. Lovecraft.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yes, that with the least amount of pixels is a very key thing. It's going to be the first thing you notice when you start playing this game.
Yeah.
So, very good elevator pitch. Spoiler policy for this episode is this is a very story-heavy game. So it's a point-and-click adventure. There's not a whole lot of gameplay going on. So I think this might be one of those rare episodes where the spoiler section is longer than the non-spoiler part. There's a lot of story and a lot of cool mysteries to uncover. We'll obviously save all those for after the spoiler wall. So if you are worried about spoilers, check down in the show notes for a timestamp for when spoilers begin. So before we get into talking about The Last Door, I want to get our personal histories with a couple of things. So the first thing is, this game's really, really heavily inspired by H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe. If you read what the developers were inspired by when writing this, what is your experience with those authors?
So classically, like I don't have a huge history with Lovecraft, except that I know at some point I definitely played Eternal Darkness, and I definitely played Dark Corners of the Earth, but I don't think I really made a connection between like cosmic horror and those games. I just knew that they were kind of weird, spooky games. And then it wasn't until I think it was around the time that they were doing Bloodborne on Bonfireside Chat, that they had an off season about Lovecraft stuff, and that kind of jogged my memory, and I was like, oh, this is a thing that I should check out. So I ended up going back through the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast, which is an incredible podcast. Big recommends. But basically what they do is they go, at least in the beginning, they go chronologically story by story and talk about the story, talk about the historical context around when it was written and that kind of stuff. So.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Like you, I don't have a ton of experience reading Lovecraft. Most of my experience with Lovecraftian ideas and stuff is I read a couple of the stories. I read The Call of Cthulhu and a couple others in this big tome of an anthology book that I bought. But most of it is stuff like playing Bloodborne or the Call of Cthulhu game that came out, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
stuff like that. So it's mostly video game based, but like the idea of like the central ideas behind like what Lovecraft thought was cool and scary is like very, very cool to me too. I love the idea that there are things out there that the human brain cannot perceive and should not try to perceive. It's very cool to me. Like the opening paragraph of The Call of Cthulhu is like the coolest shit to me. So getting into why we wanted to play The Last Door, you actually suggested this game to me. I'd never heard of it before you messaged me and said like, hey, you want to play this and talk about it on the show? So I looked it up. I saw that it was Lovecraft inspired, and Adam Bucheri, who's a Tales from the Backlog community member, former guest on the show, future guest on the show too, probably. He vouched for it too, and he's a big horror guy. So I was like, okay, this is probably good. I'll give it a shot. It's just, it's cheap, and people said it's a good Lovecraft story. Why not? And then I saw that it was made by the Game Kitchen, who also made Blasphemous, which is a game that I really love. So pretty easy, like, game to get into for me. But since you were the one who recommended it to me, what brought you to The Last Door?
So I actually kickstarted Blasphemous, and I remember in the lead up to that being released, there was also some advertisement for The Last Door. And I was like, oh, this seems interesting. And I wish listed it and forgot that it existed forever. But then like
gamer stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was when I was listening to your episode on Blasphemous, it like jogged my memory, and I was like, oh, this is like, if he liked that game, I bet he will like this game. So I was like, well, this seems like a good excuse to play it.
Yeah, same for me. And that's a good kind of segue into opening thoughts about The Last Door. I think that if you like the atmosphere in Blasphemous and the music and the art and stuff like that, I think you'll love that about The Last Door too. This is, maybe I should have said this in personal history stuff, but this is the first point and click adventure game I think I've ever played.
Oh, wow.
So this was pretty rough. I'm not going to lie. I got stuck very often in this game. It was a pretty frustrating experience sometimes to actually play. But again, I love the music. I love the way the game looks. And I really, really like the story and stuff like that too. So everything except the gameplay was very good for me. Pretty frustrating gameplay though. How about you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have a little bit more experience with point and click games, but not a lot. And it mostly breaks down to, there's like a platonic ideal of a point and click game, which is fun. Where like, I feel like the idea is that the puzzles are challenging enough that you feel like you're accomplishing something. You get that like, oh, like I made this connection, I solved the puzzle kind of feeling. Right. Unfortunately, what point and click games tend to actually be is like, here's a pile of items that you've picked up, smash them together until you find something, and then smash that into every other thing that you can interact with, and maybe you'll solve a puzzle. So,
yeah, that's fair enough. So let's take a little music break. We'll listen to some of the music. We'll get into what this game's all about. So in The Last Door, you have 2 seasons. Each season has 4 chapters. This game was released episodically, but nowadays it's being sold as a total package. You might be able to buy them separately, but it's like when they go on sale, they're like $2 each. So it's pretty recommended you just buy the whole thing. What captured me was the opening to season 1, chapter 1, starts out with this very cool like monologue and also thing that you're doing as it tutorializes how to play this game. So I actually wrote down the opening monologue. So you have this character, his name's Anthony Beechworth, and he's giving like a monologue. He says, "After all the things I've seen, After all the things I've done, I cannot escape the course my life has taken. I am beyond redemption. I just hope you can forgive me someday. Yours sincerely, Anthony Beechworth. And this is being shown on screen as the game is tutorializing how to pick up objects and interact with stuff while Anthony Beechworth hangs himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then it cuts, and then the story proper begins. That's kind of like a prologue to the story. And after that, I was in. I was like, what a way to begin your game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really strong opening. And I like that, like, it's, like, I don't know, suicide scenes in games can be, like, kind of hit and miss. There's something definitely affecting about, like, making you do it, though.
Yeah. Like, you pick up the rope, you move a chair into the right spot, you take the rope and interact with a ceiling beam to hang the noose, etc., etc.
Yeah.
While this monologue is going on. And knowing that this was a Lovecraft-inspired game, I was like, oh, this guy's seen some shit. He's done some shit. I want to know what it was that forced him into this.
Yeah, it's a really strong opening. I really, really liked it. And I like that it does play into that sort of classic setup for most Lovecraft narratives, which is your actual protagonist gets a letter from their friend who they haven't talked to forever, beckoning them to come to their, palatial estate in the English countryside kind of thing,
Yep. And in this game, you play as Beechworth's childhood friend named Jeremiah DeWitt, who's investigating a letter from Beechworth. The letter contains a Latin phrase, which I didn't look it up while I was playing the game, but I looked it up this morning. That phrase means, see that no one knows.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the letter says. And this triggers DeWitt to go, like you said, to Beechworth's palatial estate and try and figure out what the hell's going on. So after this, the mystery is on, and I really, really enjoyed just trying to figure out what it was that happened. And this kind of season 1 kind of shows you what happens, and then season 2 is following up on the events of season 1.
Mm-hmm.
So did you enjoy this kind of, this kind of quest to uncover what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of the engaging thread in like Lovecraftian media is dangling, a carrot or something in front of you. Something bad has happened. That like terrible things have been witnessed, but you have to experience those with the character also to like get to the place where whoever killed themselves or whatever terrible thing happens again, and just sort of like it I would say that like this chapter or this first season especially, I think engages a lot more with the sort of metaphysical aspects of Lovecraft stuff, so it's a little bit harder to like second guess or like figure out where the story is going, but it's really fun to just be along for the ride.
Yeah, and then season 2 is a direct continuation of what happens in season 1. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil that. I actually don't even think I'm going to introduce what goes on in season 1 or in season 2, but I think season 2 is pretty fun to, again, you're following in footsteps, trying to figure out what's going on through that too. And if you enjoyed season 1, I find it very hard to believe that you wouldn't enjoy season 2 as well, trying to figure out what's going on again.
Yeah, because the nice thing about season 2, and we'll get into it in the spoiler section, is not only does it tell the story of season 2, but it also fills in background story from the first season as well.
Right. And I think that this game is really well paced too. Like each chapter, there's 4 chapters in each season, 2 seasons. I didn't mention this before, I forgot, but this is like both seasons together takes like 5 hours to go through. So this was, it started as a game that I would play a little bit before bed, which was a bad idea because this game's very scary to like, despite how it looks, I was very scared playing this game. So it then turned into like, oh, I've got, a half hour to play. I might be able to knock out a whole chapter, if not most of a chapter, like 30, 45 minutes, something like that. It's a very easy game to play in sections, just like, reading a few chapters in a book.
Yeah, and I think that's honestly probably the best way to play it is to sit down, play one episode, and then get up, take a break, go on with the rest of your day, and kind of space it out like you're watching a TV show or something like that, because it gives, your brain more time to like ruminate on what's happened and let those ideas sink in. So, and it's funny, this game is really, not only is it obviously like broken up into seasons and episodes, but the way that the story is told follows a very like TV show format. So, at the end of every episode, there's like a continue the adventure in the next episode. At the beginning of every episode, there's like a last time on the last door section,
right. And every episode kind of takes place in one specific location, especially in season 1. It'll be like, this episode, you're in this house. And then the next chapter, you're in this school building. And then et cetera, et cetera. And I think it is a good idea to try to finish up a chapter during a play session if you can. I would hate to like put it down in the middle of a chapter and then come back 4 days later and just have this assortment of items and kind of an unclear memory of like, who am I supposed to be trying to find, or who am I supposed to talk to right now?
Yeah, that could definitely get confusing. And I can also see like longer play sessions than a single episode getting frustrating too.
As like the frustrations from gameplay start to mount up. Season 2 introduces multiple locations throughout each chapter, and they give you like kind of an overworld map where you can pick what location you want to go to. Sometimes you'll need to find an item in one location and then take it to a different location that you've been to before, which only made things worse for my frustrations playing it. But I do like the idea. Like if you're into this, then this just adds another layer to the puzzle of like what you should be doing. Where should you take this new item that you just picked up? Stuff like that.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like, even though season 1 and season 2 functionally are pretty similar, you can definitely see a difference between like the way that they're designed and even like the quality of graphics. I feel gets slightly better. Like characters have more animations, things like that, in between season 1 and season 2.
Yeah. Despite like the way that the game might look, I'm glad you brought up the animations, because like this is a game where just take a minute, you can count how many pixels are on the screen, or at least how many blocks are making up the stuff. But like the way that the environments are drawn and the animations are very good and expressive, I think, despite, the player character looking like he's made of 9 rectangles. The animations and stuff are still really, really good.
Yeah, and I had a thought about that, and I wonder if it's because there's like a specific low poly style that I've noticed kind of popped up in indie games over the last couple of years, but it's where the character models or sprites are specifically like long and tall instead of being like short, like you would think of on like a Nintendo game.
Right.
And I wonder if that like definition helps with their expressiveness, because you get more like arm animation and you can see more like leg movements and stuff.
That's true. Yeah. The characters are, now that I think about it, they are real tall compared to, like a Mario or something like that. So I kind of mentioned this before, kind of still talking about the way the game looks. When I first saw this game, when you first posited that we play this and talk about it on the show, I'm always wary of horror games because I don't like being scared. And I've started to like appreciate a lot more horror games. And I saw this game and I was like, I can count the pixels. How scary could this possibly be? And I could not have been more wrong. This game was terrifying to me. and they use a lot of sharp transitions. There's some jump scares. They use a lot of music and sound effects to make you feel really creeped out.
Yeah.
This ended up being a lot scarier than I expected. And I wonder, like, I think you like horror games a lot more than I do. So
I know.
What was your experience like?
So, like, first of all, I feel like I kind of owe you an apology because I didn't expect there to be jump scares. I was like, there's no way that, look at this game. There's no way that there's jump scares in it. And
Right.
then the first one that I came across, I was like, oh no, Dave is going to be so bad.
I got like 3 times in the first chapter, several jump scares.
But yeah, no, I also found it really affecting. I think all of the things that you mentioned are really, really strong. They do a good job of, building an atmosphere instead of just having scary visuals or, just having the jump scare. It's the combination of everything. It's the fact that you're walking through an empty house. There's slightly melancholy piano going on in the background. Your footsteps are in the mix, one of the loudest things that you will ever hear in the game.
Yep.
Which it has to be on purpose.
Oh yeah.
If you're playing, did you play with closed captions?
Probably, because that's the way I play most games, but I don't remember.
So, I specifically noticed that for the closed captions, it will caption obviously what the sound is, but also what direction it's coming from, which is really interesting. And so all of this sort of builds together to really cement that feeling of unease as you move through whatever environment you're moving through.
Yeah. Yep. I was always very tense because things can turn on a dime in this game. And that when I say jump scares, I don't always mean things jumping at the screen at you, although there's a couple of those throughout the game. But there's a lot of really sharp transitions. You'll exit a room and then the next time you go in that room, something has changed drastically. Colors are different. Sound effects are really important for these jump scares. Or you'll interact with something, it will fade to black, and then when it comes back up, something's there that you weren't ready for. And there's a lot of stuff like that. So I think that stuff mellowed out in the second season, but the first chapter really got me. And then there's a couple others I'm thinking of where classic horror game stuff where they're you knock on the door, it's locked, but you can look through the keyhole. And I'm I don't want to look in the keyhole. Something's going to jump out, guaranteed.
Yeah.
And that happened a couple times.
Yeah. And even they use that sort of classic, it's not a record skip, but it's a surprise stab. So it'll be a violin stab or somebody banging on a piano. And that's a super cheesy device, but it works really well. And I don't know why, but it, that in combination, there are a couple of times, you mentioned, where, you'll walk into a room and maybe leave and come back and things aren't really different. And in this game, you're never you don't die. There's no hit point system. There's no game over. So logically, you're never really in danger as a character, when you're playing the game. But walking up to, I don't know, this strange humanoid figure that's sitting in a bathtub is pretty freaking scary.
It is. This kind of, I've said on the show before that I think most walking sims are scary to me because, and I think this game has a very similar thing where if something jumps out, I can't do anything about it. I can't fight back. It's the reason why Bloodborne doesn't scare me, because I can kill anything that jumps out at me. Whereas this game and Firewatch and Gone Home terrified me sometimes, because I know if something jumps out, I have no recourse. I just have to take that scare in the face,
Yeah. Yeah, Gone Home is a really interesting example of that, because that's explicitly not a horror game that plays with horror atmospheres so much.
It's really good because of that, and the way that it keeps you on your toes. And if you want to hear more about how scared I was about Gone Home, I did an episode on the show about that. So, but yeah, same kind of thing here. And good transition to talk about how this game plays. So let's enjoy a little bit more music, and we'll get into that. So, as a point-and-click adventure game, you have a couple things you're doing. You're walking, and you're checking the screen for every single thing that you can interact with. And so you said you have a little bit of experience with point-and-clicks. Like, what other games have you played?
So I've played the Broken Sword game, the first one. Which is like a Sierra point and click.
Okay.
I think it came out around the same time as, oh gosh, what's the one with the Louisiana guy? Oh, man. It doesn't matter. Anyway, so that's like an older point and click that like was sort of golden age era. I've tried to play Monkey Island, and I really want to like it, but I've never made any sort of progress in it. And then I was kind of into like Myst and Riven, which are like point and click from a first person perspective kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. I did play Myst, but I played it when I was like 9 years old. I was way too young. I just couldn't get it. So this is the first one I've ever played. I have a couple that I've bought. I just haven't tried them yet because gamer behavior. I buy things and I don't play them.
Right.
So you go into a room, you check for everything you can interact with. Sometimes you can pick up items. Sometimes you'll just get instructions or like little lore snippets or something. Sometimes you'll just click on something and it says, the window's been shut for a long time. You're like, oh, okay, cool. Glad to know that. But this kind of made me wish that it had like a highlight everything that's interactable button like Disco Elysium or games like that have. Because there are so many times when I thought I interacted with everything, but it just turns out that this couple of pixels over here on top of the table is actually something I can pick up, and I need it to progress. And I think I made it through a couple of chapters before I was like, I have to get a guide. I'm not going to finish this game if I don't use a guide.
Yeah, and this game is particularly bad. I've never seen another game do the thing where you have to interact with something twice. So it doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes when you mouse over something you can interact with, you either have like a word bubble to talk to people, a hand to interact or grab it, and then a magnifying glass to look at it. So you might like look at something and he'll be like, oh, this is a pile of papers. And you're like, okay, cool, moving on. But you might also be able to pick up that pile of papers. So you have to interact with it twice, which doesn't make sense at all. Like I don't understand the function of that.
I got caught with that a couple times too. Probably not a couple, probably several times too. Yeah, and this got me thinking, am I just bad at this game? Like, am I bad at these types of games? Or is this game bad at what it's doing? Because there were several times where, like, you pick up items, sometimes you combine them with other items to make stuff. Sometimes you need to use your items on things in the environment. And there were so many times where I was like, I feel like I've combed this house. I've tried everything. I don't know what to do. Like, I have no idea. And then I check the guide and it's like, oh, you missed this item 3 rooms ago. Or like you said, you interacted with that item once. You should have interacted with it twice to pick it up. I missed the little hand icon. And yeah, it just got me thinking, like, am I just bad or is this game too obtuse?
I think, from my limited experience at least, that the game feels a little obtuse. And unfortunately, this is one specific area where the art style kind of hurts it, because you literally are pixel hunting. So if there is something that is like you say, like 1 or 2 pixels, that's like, I don't know, a small bottle or like a candle or something that you're supposed to pick up, it might just look like something on a table, but not like, it's not noticeable enough. Or I remember specifically there was a chapter where you needed to get sap to put a mask back together. So I had the pieces of the mask and I kept on trying to put it back together, and they were like, well, you can't do that. And so like you said, I had no idea how to put it back together. And then finally I found, there's one stump on one screen that I guess I just didn't look at, because it literally looks like it's part of the background. You would, there's nothing outstanding about it. So unfortunately, I think it might be a little bit on the design end.
Yeah. It just really made me wish for that highlight all items that are interactable button from some other games. Also, I played this on Switch, and it runs great on Switch, but using a control stick to mouse over everything on the screen is a lot more cumbersome than using a mouse to do that. And I think that might have played into it too. So I actually, like, a rare recommendation for me to play this game on PC and not Switch, if you can help it. Like, I think you can handle it if you play it on Switch, but using a mouse is way more helpful, I guess, than using that control stick.
Yeah, and I can't imagine a computer that couldn't run this well. It's such a simple game,
The other thing that gave me frustration playing the game is there were several times where you would finish up a scene and the character would say, okay, I need to go here and talk to this person. But if you go to that place, that person's not there, or they're not ready to talk to you, or whatever. You can't progress. What you actually have to do is go do something else that the character didn't mention. And if you don't do that, you can't progress. This was way worse in season 2 when you have many locations to go to. But there were so many times where it was like, I need to go to the church and talk to the priest. And I went to the church and it's locked. And I go all around. There's no way to open up the church. What I had to do was go to a different place, talk to a different person who's not a priest, and then yada, yada, yada. Very frustrating.
Yeah, I definitely found that to be an issue in the second game specifically. There's a little bit of it in the first game, especially with the levels that are a little bit more open, for lack of a better word. But since the second one does deal with a lot of diverse locations, it is really easy to go to a place and be like, okay, I can't get in here. Like, what? This is the place I'm supposed to go. Like, what could I possibly do? And a lot of those conditions feel arbitrary too. So it's not even like you could be like, oh, well, of course the church wasn't open because I didn't do X, Y, and Z. It's the church wasn't open because I don't even remember why that one happens. I think it literally is just you talk to an unrelated person and the bell rings and then the church is open. So,
there were a lot of times when, exactly like you said, whatever you need to do to trigger the church opening, if we're going to keep using this example, is not related to anything to do with the church, or other situations. And this is a little bit more on me, maybe, for not totally experimenting. Just a lot of item interactions that don't make a whole lot of sense, or like they're not super intuitive, or you might not even consider to like try to combine these items because these items don't go together in real life. So a lot of situations where I'm like, I need an item. Let me just literally every item I have, try to make it interact with every other item I have until I figure it out. And sometimes that worked. Sometimes it didn't because I missed a couple of pixels in a room 3 rooms away, or I didn't return to a room that I thought I was done with. Just a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, there's one that I can specifically think of when it's either in maybe the first or second episode, but like in one of them, you find like a violin player and you can pick up sheet music on the ground from his room. But if you try to give him the sheet music, he doesn't do anything with it. There's a bird cage in the attic that has a bird feather in it. First of all, I don't know why you can't just like tip the cage over and grab the feather. But what the game wants you to do is like make a tube with the sheet music so you can blow the feather out of the cage. And that's somehow the leap of logic that you're supposed to do by yourself.
Yeah. And so I'm not swearing off point and click games forever, because I just have a feeling that this one's a bit too, wonky with some of the interactions it wants you to do. But if this is the logical, like, things you're supposed to come to, conclusions you're supposed to come to when you're playing these games, then this just might not be my genre, because I had a hard time.
Yeah. And to be fair, like, oftentimes more modern, because for better or worse, like the item inventory puzzle thing is a big part of the genre. And that kind of weird complexity is too also. But a lot of times, more modern games will have built-in hint systems, which I think is at least something. It is kind of unfortunate that there's just like nothing in this game though.
Yep. Maybe that would be helpful. I wonder if this game is like banking on you having decades of experience playing this type of game, or if it's just, they made this game, it wasn't their forte. They obviously switched genres completely when they made Blasphemous, and that game fucking rules. So it just might not be very well designed. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. So people may be asking, Dave, you sound like you had a real hard time. Like you didn't have any fun playing this game. Why did you keep playing it? So beside the promise of podcasting with Jamie here, I really enjoyed the story and I love the music in this game. Like the soundtrack is excellent. I love the soundtrack in Blasphemous, and this one has that same kind of like moody, a lot of piano in the background when you're walking around. When the soundtrack goes bigger into like more orchestral stuff, I think that's really good too. Like the opening menu or the opening theme that plays at the beginning of each chapter is excellent. You've probably heard that song by this point in the episode. And then they will often take the music away during scenes when you're supposed to be kind of tense, and all you can hear is your footsteps. And we've talked about the sound design, but the sound of bottles falling to the ground, or the sound of walking on creaky floorboards, interacting with doorknobs that are locked, that jiggle when you try to open a locked door. All of those sound effects are really good too. And they play huge into like the atmosphere that this game has.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing that I thought of as we were talking about it is this game does a really incredible job of incorporating actual voice recording into the sound effects too. So there'll be, points where, I don't know, there's a character running, or you'll see someone hunched over praying, and they're using actual like recorded voice clips. And for some reason, I don't know if it's just because the general aesthetic of it is so like low tech, quote unquote, but like having those really clean voice lines in the game really like stands out and is almost like more scary.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, because there's no voice acting for the characters in the game. So when you do hear, like you said, a character softly praying in the background, or some creepy laughter coming from a room 3 rooms away, that I think that stuff does hit harder, because other than that, there is no voice acting.
Yeah.
So moving on into some final thoughts before spoiler time. The question I've been asking lately in these final thoughts sections is, Jamie, what do you think about this game, and who would you recommend this game to?
I think this is a good I'm glad I played this game. I enjoyed playing it. It has the trappings of its genre, for better or worse. But I think all of the strengths that we mentioned are strong enough to pull me through the game and keep me interested. In terms of who I would recommend it to, that's, I think, a little bit harder because, like, obviously people that like Lovecraft stuff would love this. I feel like this is such a good, in the same way that, like, Bloodborne is a really good expression of Lovecraftian horror, like, this is a really good expression of that. The problem is that, like, the gameplay aspect of it is such a, like, hurdle to get over that, like, if you weren't already at least a little bit genre savvy or, like, familiar with the gameplay, it might be, like, prohibitively difficult.
Yeah, and it's not like a gameplay a gameplay unrecommendation. What's the opposite? I can't think. A gameplay stay away because there's no, like, because it's not active enough or something like that. Like, I'm perfectly fine with games where you're not killing stuff all the time. It's just that, like, this was very frustrating to play through. I was pulled through the game by the mystery that you're uncovering, and I know we, like, barely touched on it, but I promise you it's cool. It's really cool. I just don't want to spoil it because it's a really cool thing to uncover. And if you're Lovecraft savvy, maybe you will have an idea already of some stuff like that. But it's cool. I was pulled through by that. I was pulled through by the art and the music and stuff like that too. So I did finish this game. I mean, if I really fucking hated it, I would have just texted you, Jamie, and said, I don't want to play this anymore. Let's pick a different game.
Yeah.
So I did make it through. I'm not shy about using a guide though. Like, if you're someone who will not use a guide, you might find this to be too frustrating to get through.
Yeah.
Or maybe you just, you get on with this type of game better than I do. So I will recommend this for people who've played a bunch of point and clicks and can kind of identify some of those trappings that we've talked about. And people who love Lovecraftian stuff. I think this is excellent as far as that goes. With my limited exposure to Lovecraft literature and stuff, like I said, I've played more Lovecraftian video games than like Lovecraft stories that I've read, but it's good. It's a good story. It's a good mystery. And we're going to get into that in the spoiler section. But before that, a little bit of housekeeping. The best things to do to support Tales from the Backlog are to hit subscribe if you haven't already. If you've enjoyed the episode or if you've been enjoying the show, please consider leaving a rating or review if your platform allows that. That's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, stuff like that. Tales from the Backlog has a Patreon that I would appreciate it if you supported, if you wish. And Tales from the Backlog has a Discord server where people will be in there talking about horror games throughout October. Also consider listening to a Top 3 podcast where each episode we pick a topic and do a top 3. That's a fun show. Really recommend that. And if you want to hear more Jamie, go back and listen to that Silent Hill 2 episode. I think that's an excellent listen. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, it's spoiler time for The Last Door. All right, Jamie and I are back, and time for spoilers for The Last Door. So, I guess I want to give, like, the background information first, like the stuff that they discover first, and then we can go through the events of the door, or the events of The Last Door. So, there's another world, and this is, like, anytime I get this kind of thing in a Lovecraftian story or otherwise, just hook this shit in my veins. The idea that there's the idea that there's another world, another dimension out there that is right next to ours, but we just can't perceive it. And the fact that we can't perceive it is good. We do not want to see what's in there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another world contained behind this thing called the Veil. And it contains, there's a lot of proper nouns here. It contains what's called the final truth, the first language, and the verb, all of which are ways that you can kind of shape the world to your desires, I suppose. If you find this, you're able to use it to control the world or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, this was your understanding too.
Yeah, I mean, it seems they don't really expand much on like there are characters that want to look through the veil, but
right.
Until the very, very end of the game, they don't really make it clear like what you get out of that, other than just like terrible, unknowable secrets about the universe.
Right. So this, I think it's the end of season 1 where you find out like what some of them are after, which is this, final truth or something like that. The thing that's going to allow them unlimited power or something like that.
Right. Specifically, I think what they mention is the ability to like recreate the world or possibly the universe however they see fit.
Right. Yeah. And I think they said something to the effect of like, the human world, the world that we live in, is not really like the true world. This world beyond the veil is the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So beyond the veil, there is a region with a very Lovecraftian sounding name. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. Starts with a Z. It's got apostrophes and shit.
Mm-hmm.
Not even going to try to pronounce it. Inside of that region, there's a portal that leads to this other world. That portal is called The Last Door. Title of the game. And it was created by ancients or something like that. And you have a bunch of characters in this game who know about this and they're trying to access this. Some of them access it on purpose and some of them kind of accidentally access it, which is another thing I really love about this type of cosmic horror. The fact that some people accidentally find it and it just fucking destroys them.
Yeah.
So that is part of why Beechworth kills himself in the prologue, but we'll get to him later. So the game starts with DeVitt going to Beechworth's mansion, and this was just like one jump scare after another. I got jump scared by the birds so many times in this opening chapter.
Yeah. There's definitely the one where you like leave the room and then you come back and the room is gone all red and there's like just a bunch of crows sitting around and the music cuts, and I think they do that like jump scare sting.
Right.
And again, like when you're in the room, you're never in direct danger, but like it's so unsettling just having all of these crows sitting around.
Yep. It's really jarring when they arrive, and then when you leave the room and come back, they're gone again.
Yeah.
And very creepy. But the first chapter is basically just DeVitt going through Beechworth's house, making your way up to the attic where he hung himself. So you find Beechworth's body, and then another jump scare when you see him and he's, oh, my beautiful friend, what have you done? And then a million crows bust through the window and start eating the body. And I was like, what have I gotten myself into? Because that's like 2 or 3 jump scares in a half hour.
Yeah. There's definitely a crow theme going on if you haven't picked that up yet.
Yeah. So after that, DeVitt goes to his old boarding school, which has turned into kind of a makeshift hospital, which is very creepy, just describing it like that. He discovers that his old kind of mentor figure is still at the boarding school. Everyone there, all the people who came in, like the doctors and nurses who came in to work there, they're just like, yeah, he was here when we got here. We just kind of leave him alone. That idea that like there's this guy who's been here longer than anybody else. No one knows what he's even doing. That's very creepy by itself.
Yeah, and I think specifically, and we'll talk about what happened at the school before, but the fact that it started out as a school and turned into a mental asylum, like specifically, seems very fitting.
Yeah. There's a couple of like side characters that kind of add to this like creepy mental asylum vibe or atmosphere too. There's like a guy who's kind of like in fits basically all the time, and he's constantly got nurses around him. When you get the nurse to leave, you can finally talk to him, and he like has this, I think he has like this moment of lucidity, and he's like, don't trust the groundskeeper. And then the next time you go look for him, he's gone. And so that was creepy. There's also another person who is there with his sister, and she's been hiding letters that he's been sending, and like gaslighting him into thinking he's crazy, and that was weird too.
Yeah, that situation is always interesting to me because like those characters aren't important, but there's so much that like is communicated in that short little snippet of story.
Yeah, and even before you find like the actual evils that are happening at the school, you see like very quickly through talking to these little side characters that like no one at this asylum, this hospital, is like doing well.
Yeah. Even like the nurses and the doctors are all kind of struggling. And it's like specifically a religious hospital. And I always think like, I guess maybe it was because I was like raised in the church, but I always think like corruption of religious iconography stuff is really cool and interesting. You see that a lot in Blasphemous too.
Yeah, it's a thing with the game kitchen, I think. Yeah. So what you find down there is DeWitt's old professor is with the help of like the groundskeeper, I think his name's Baldwin, is sacrificing patients at the hospital to something. And you kind of uncover like this backstory that while DeWitt was at this school, he and some classmates, along with this professor, opened up the veil. And it's kind of unclear to me whether they knew exactly what they were doing. There's some backstory that I think it's Beechworth's father learned about the veil and then passed on that knowledge to Beechworth. But I never got the feeling that they knew exactly what horrors awaited them behind the veil, you know?
Yeah, not until at least the way that it's presented this time around. It definitely doesn't. It seems like they're like, I don't know, like a club that gets together to like debate ideals, and somehow they stumbled across this ability to open up a portal to another world.
Yeah. It started out as like the Dead Poets Society, basically.
That's exactly what I thought too.
But yeah, turned into let's do some rituals and see what happens, which is never going to end well in a story like this. And then you find this professor. I think this is the chapter. I get some of these mixed up. I think this is the one that opens with the professor like self-flagellating. And then at the end, he's blind. So you have this, is he blind or is he deaf?
I think he's blind because you have to like sneak around him.
Yeah. You have to sneak around, and then eventually he finds you. You have a little talk, and then he sets himself on fire, if I remember right, which is, again, fucking ridiculous. Like the things that are happening, like the way that this snowball keeps getting bigger as you go along. This is only chapter 2, and we've already like gotten this far.
Yeah, already
pretty crazy.
2 people have killed themselves. It's pretty obvious like some pretty serious shit is going on, even if you don't really know exactly what it is.
Yeah. And then I believe this is the chapter that ends with DeWitt being captured.
Yes. Yeah, he gets bonked on the head.
And then you wake up in the beginning of chapter 3 inside of a coffin. And this is one of those scenes where those sound effects they're really, really good. Like the sound of him like hyperventilating and banging on this coffin lid, even though the screen is pitch black. It's really, really like stressful, that short little part.
And then if I remember correctly, you can even hear maybe digging sounds or the sounds of like a grave being filled in.
Yeah, sounds about right. So, but he breaks out of that. And he breaks out of the coffin and just, you can continue to just wander the school grounds for a little bit, or the hospital grounds for a little bit, even though he was, they were attempting to bury him alive.
Yeah.
So, I just thought of something. I never got like a true thing about like why they were or how they were sacrificing the patients. Later on, we learned that one of the ways to lift the veil is through terror, like sheer terror. And so is this like burying someone alive a way to get them into this state where they can go in?
It might be, because if I remember correctly, the next chapter is one that feels like dreamy enough that it might be supposed to represent that in-between place. Because it one of the things that's very pervasive thematically about the in-between world is like the usage of fog and like obfuscation. That's the chapter where you do the weird fog sound puzzle. So I wonder if that's what that is supposed to represent.
Yeah, that could be. And now that I'm thinking about it, chapter 4 is the one where you're going through those city streets, right? And you're following...
I think that's chapter 3.
Is that chapter 3?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, regardless, after you wake up from being in the coffin, you have a chapter where you're walking through these city streets and you're following this person who's like, seems like they're leading you somewhere, and then you have to do adventure game stuff to unlock how to go where that person is and stuff like that. And it is kind of foggy sometimes, and you're right, you do that puzzle where they give you an order of like, they'll say like ocean, wind, etc. And you have to go to the kind of path that has that corresponding sound. Yeah. And I thought that was an interesting way to like, it seems like an interesting puzzle for people in real life for how to navigate through this, like if you were actually there, that would be an interesting way to navigate. In the game, it was just, it wasn't that difficult. I just took a screenshot of the note that told me what order to do stuff in and then followed it that way.
Yeah, I agree. It also, if you have the closed captions turned on, it'll show you, if there's multiple sound sources, it'll place them on the top of the screen where they are. So if you're like standing in front of crows, but you need to go to the right where the shore is, like in the middle of the screen will be crows, and on the right of the screen, it'll have like a little thing for shore. And then when you move far enough over, it'll be centered again, which is cool.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you described that closed captioning in the non-spoiler part, it made me think that this would be less like subtitles and more of like subtitles plus accessibility, and that kind of confirms, like that seems like a big accessibility thing for people who may be hard of hearing. That laughing guy in the bathtub is also in chapter 3, I believe, which is one of the creepiest, like, reverse things. Like, I expected something to jump out of the bathtub, know. That's the one where you hear this creepy laughing from several rooms away as you're going through this building. And then you can finally open up the bathroom, and it's, pull back the shower curtain. There's nothing there. It's just a recording. Did you turn on the recording again after you turn it off? Yeah. Yeah. Very creepy. It's not the laugh track anymore. It's someone crying. Very weird. So chapter 4, if I remember, starts to like fill in the picture of what happened to DeVitt and his friends and the professor. So like we said, they accidentally opened up the veil doing that experiment, and beyond the veil there is a kind of protecting force, or monster or something
Mm-hmm.
that tries to keep people out of this region that I'm not going to try to pronounce, keep them away from that final truth or whatever. So they have drawn the ire of that thing by opening the portal, which is another just very, it's not enough that there's another world in there. There's a guardian in there that they've angered.
Right. And that's the giant crow thing. I mean, like,
Right.
you hardly ever see it totally. I think it maybe only shows it once, but there's obviously like reoccurring crow imagery. There's the part where you look through the keyhole that you mentioned earlier. That's like the jump scare is a giant red crow eye.
Right.
You know.
And I didn't really think about this, but you are kind of unlocking like this, like what's real here and what's not. Like if the coffin, like the buried alive thing, was enough to get DeVitt into this like kind of middle place, then a lot of the stuff that's happening here may be real, but not in the way that they show you.
Yeah, when I was playing DeVitt's chapters, I definitely had a bigger sense, because he also, if I remember correctly, has a lot of like in between or like interstitial pieces, even either at the beginning of an episode or at the end of it, where it's just like him walking to the left through the fog, and you know, maybe there's like some text pop-ups or he's saying something to himself, but it definitely has a more like dreamlike quality to it.
Yeah.
There's a lot more like weird supernatural stuff that happens. As opposed to the second season, which feels, until the last chapter, I would say, a lot more grounded.
Yeah. So we kind of get the puzzle filled in, I think, in chapter 4 a lot about like what happened and then what was the result of that. You know, so they opened up this, they opened up the veil, and then I think some of them like continued to do this. Like they continued to meet and like do this. Dead Poet Society, but evil, you know? And the effects of this are starting to be like revealed. So there's one of them that just like died, I think, because of all of the like the mental stress of this. What was their name? Did I write this down? Ashcroft, maybe something like that.
That sounds right. I think he's the one that started the club, if I remember correctly.
One of them died because of all the stress. DeVitt is left with amnesia, which is why he doesn't remember this. It's why this is a mystery game. And so the other members saw that he didn't remember anything and chose not to like fill him in, you know? If you wake up one day with no memory of what's been going on and they're like, hey, actually, we've been like going into this like other dimension. We're being chased by a demon. Everything's fucked. So try to process that real quick. Like they're just like, no, just don't tell him.
Well, and there's also, I mean, they don't reveal it yet, but there's also further motivation for keeping him in the dark that the club has later on.
Yeah. And to be honest, some of the stuff with the playwright, which is the club's like, or club turned cult, their name, some of the stuff with their motivations other than trying to get in there and shape the world to their liking or recreate the world to their liking. A lot of that stuff went over my head or in one ear and out the other. And I have not a little habit. I have a habit of, if I'm frustrated in the game, sometimes like I'll miss story stuff. And I did some wiki diving this morning preparing for this episode, but I wasn't going to replay the game or anything like that, or watch a Let's Play or something.
Right. And to be fair, the way that's communicated, again, is not always straightforward either. So,
yeah, they're giving you a lot of pieces in a nonlinear order sometimes. So putting some of this stuff together, I give a lot of credit to the people who wrote stuff in the wiki or some of the YouTube recaps that I watched for doing this, because some of this just didn't stick. But this stuff, like the results of this, one person dying, DeVitt getting amnesia, this is why Beechworth killed himself in the beginning, because he just doesn't want to live with all of this pain and trauma that he feels like is his fault, or that not, I was going to say he feels like he had a role in it. He did have a role. He
definitely had a role.
It is partly his fault. But yeah, this is why. And this is the first big kind of mystery that we had. Why did he kill himself? And this is why.
Yeah. And I think right at the end here, they start to introduce the like drama mask motif and the robes, which is a really cool, like spooky visual motif that kind of follows throughout the rest of the next season.
Yeah. I'm glad you liked it too. I thought the whole theater theming of the second season was really cool. Even if I didn't totally understand all of like that story stuff, I at least thought that theming was cool. So I don't think there's multiple endings for season 1.
Not that I know of, no.
Yeah. So, this has another thing that I really like, just like in Bloodborne, where DeVitt goes to his friend Alexander's house, and Alexander's been living in the Vale, like projected out of his physical body for a long time. Like his body is in bad shape, just like Mikolash in Bloodborne. And when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, that's super cool. Because like the part where Mikolash in Bloodborne, when he dies and he thinks he's going to go back to his body, but his body's been dead for a long time.
Yeah.
That was something about Bloodborne that I loved. This guy's not dead, but his body is in rough shape because he's not been inhabiting it for a long time. His mansion was super creepy. Another just fucking creepy, dark ass mansion. And so he wakes up, or you wake him up, and he injects DeVitt with the serum again. DeVitt goes into the Vale, and I think he has like a change of heart, and he decides to seal it away, like seal himself in there, but keep everyone else away from this final truth, because he's remembered why all this is happening.
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily outlined in the first season, but it definitely comes to light in the second season that, he's basically trying to close the last door so nobody else can do this.
He comes to that realization as he learns about like what is happening. I guess he comes to that realization that like, hey, this has to stop. We can't keep doing this.
2 other people died. 1 other person probably will die. Like, this is no good.
So yeah, I really enjoyed season 1, that kind of build up all the revelations, learning about what the Veil is, what's hiding in there, the experiment gone wrong, like, well, not gone wrong, but the ramifications that they could have never predicted of these experiments. I really enjoyed uncovering this stuff.
Yeah, it's really a lot of fun. And like I said, even if it's not really like directly communicated to you, there's a lot of like really good, I don't know, like emotional resonance in what's going on. And, you know, you can feel the impact of like the dramatic scenes, even if you don't know, like, is this happening in the real world? Like, is this the way that my character is interpreting what's happening? You know, like, I think that for as interesting as the story ends up being, that stuff is kind of secondary to like the emotional connection that you feel with like whatever your character is experiencing.
Yeah. I just thought of, so if this is kind of what your character's experiencing, whether it's real or not, it got me thinking about how a lot of Lovecraftian games will introduce some kind of like sanity mechanic or something like that. This game doesn't have a sanity meter or something. And I think I like this better as like a depiction of DeVitt's probably losing it a little bit, learning about this stuff, rather than having a literal meter on your screen or something like that says, hey man, this meter gets filled up, your mind's going to break or something like that, good. You know? I think I like this as a depiction of him kind of slowly losing it, but still moving forward with the quest, I guess.
Yeah, it's a more like diegetic way of expressing that idea.
The end of season 1 also introduces Dr. Wakefield, who is starting to like follow DeVitt, and then he takes over as the main character in season 2 with I forget what the guy's who's his partner. He has a partner.
There's another doctor who's like an occultist or like a you know, specialist in that kind of stuff that is German, I think, and he runs around with him, but I don't remember what his name was.
Yeah, and so he's with you, and I kind of like that transition from like Wakefield has no idea what he's getting himself into. The doctor tells him that like several times. He's like, hey, if we do this, there's no coming back. You will not be the same.
Right.
And Wakefield's like, yeah, I got to find my patient.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really funny that so like the first game starts with a character chasing after another character, right? And then the second game starts the exact same way. Like now your protagonist from the first game is the character being chased after, and you've got another protagonist who's chasing after him. It kind of humorously suggests just like an infinite line of Lovecraft protagonists continuously following after
Dr.
each
Wakefield's other. One of Dr. Wakefield's like acquaintances is going to go chase after him.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And then, I like that transition where about halfway through this, Wakefield's partner dies of a mysterious, he just gets sick and dies pretty quickly. And it's never explained like what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think just because like for like thematic wholeness, I assume it must be related to like the Guardian or something, because it would be weird if he just like randomly died of the flu or something. But
that's what I assumed though. I assumed he just got the flu and died or something. And then after that, what I was getting to is like Wakefield is like semi-prepared to take this on. Like you don't get the feeling that he's like an expert to the point that this other guy was, but now he's lost his, mentor, expert buddy, and he's got to take it on the rest of the way himself.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, DeVitt and his therapist make an interesting contrast in main characters, because I don't know if this is me reading into it too much, but it feels like DeVitt was a lot more like affected by the stuff that he was seeing, and like reacted to it more. Whereas the therapist character like feels like he is at least able to keep his head together for most of the second season. And I don't know if that's maybe just a matter of, again, like a lot of the second season feels much more like a grounded, almost like a detective story than it does, until it starts to get into the weird, really like culty stuff at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Wakefield is definitely a lot more scientific about what's going on. And I wonder so DeVitt had amnesia, but that doesn't mean that his brain was healed, or like his psyche was healed from the things that happened before. So maybe he was just a lot closer to the breaking point, even though he seemed normal because he just didn't remember it. Whereas Wakefield has had no experience with this up until then.
Yeah, that definitely could be the case too.
So I actually wrote down less like beat by beat stuff for season 2, maybe because like you said, there are a lot of parts in it where you do go talk to random people who tell you about another person, and then you go talk to that other person who tells you about this location. And then you go to that location and you might find some creepy shit there. But there was a lot less like, I guess we already know a lot of the story. That was kind of what's interesting about season 2 is you know what happened to DeVitt.
Mm-hmm.
You know actually a lot about what's going on. And you're playing as a character who's filling in kind of like he's learning 80% the same stuff that you already know. And then there's some stuff in the margins that's also getting filled in season 2. Maybe that's why I didn't write down as much, but that it is kind of interesting. Like that's not always a really successful narrative thing, right? When you know exactly what's going on, but the characters are like, I don't know what's going on here.
Well, and what's interesting specifically about season 2 is for as much as it is centered around Wakefield looking for DeVitt, what he ends up finding mostly is like you said, like background story about the first game. So it's almost like it is a direct sequel, but it's also kind of like a prequel as well.
Yeah. And a lot of it's centered on how people discovered that fear is the thing that can open the last door.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very cool way to open it up. And I don't know if this is something that's in other Lovecraft stories or Lovecraftian media, things that were inspired, but the idea that the key to this door is you experiencing primal fear, and then that will unlock it for you.
Yeah, it is a cool idea. It's not something that I can think of being in any other like Lovecraftian media, but it is a cool like expression of that. Like you know so much that you're literally driven crazy, and then the next piece of that is like of course you are able to like interact with otherworldly or, you know, parallel universe kind of stuff because your brain is so like outside of normal conventions at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so a lot of the stuff that I found very cool in season 2 is the kind of the process of learning that fear is the key, you know? So we have that war veteran named Captain Skid who just in the middle of a battle was so scared that he entered the veil and he had an encounter, I believe, with that guardian.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is really cool. Like the idea that this happens naturally to people in those moments of intense fear, like in a war.
Yeah. And they don't really do a really good job of explaining like what happened with him specifically. Because like you said, they do mention that he's like notably one of the few people to actually like encounter the crow and survive.
Yeah. I don't think they went into detail about how he did that. And that's kind of fine with me. It would be kind of lame if he was like, yeah, all you have to do is shoot it in the leg and run away or something like that. But
yeah, they do. There's another part towards the end where they introduce like this sort of like folk horror Irish island that might also have another like elder god living on it. And one of the things they mention is that it doesn't like iron, so like that might be a thing. But
yeah, it could be. Yeah, when you find that war veteran, I think he's in an opium den, if I remember that right.
Yeah,
which, you know, obviously this guy was so traumatized by this experience that you find him in an opium den, not doing well, you know. And so this weird, you know, like island that you mentioned, Irish, Gaelic, I don't know. Is it in Ireland? Did they ever say?
I don't know that they say specifically. The words, I mean, I don't know that much about like ancient European languages, but the words look Irish or Gaelic.
Definitely in that area, right? I mean, this game takes place in the UK. So yeah, that island was interesting as the people on that island are going through this kind of like ritual night. I was frustrated by gameplay on this island, like going to all of these different places in orders that didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. But the things like the lore, the backstory that you uncover there was really, really satisfying. I like the idea of a hole that, or like a hole in the earth that's too big.
Right.
That you have there. Very cool. And is that where like the other eldritch god is supposed to be inhabiting?
Yeah, they it's like represented as a snake or a dragon, and I think they refer to it as like the crooked one a couple times, which is definitely like a great Lovecraft eldritch monstrosity name.
Yeah. And then in the mansion there, not DeVitt, Wakefield finds the tunnel that's constructed there, where they're experimenting with this fear as the driving, or fear as the key to open the last door. And I love that, like this very low tech, like DeVitt and his buddies, they made a serum to induce this fear. In this place, they're like, here's this tunnel. There's a monster down there. It's pitch black. We're just going to put you down there and let you unlock it. Like, you're going to get scared, and we're going to lock the door. And there's like a primitive, like, microphone listening device down there where they can listen. It's real fucked up, but I like it.
It is really cool the way that like you say that a lot of the second season is people that have realized that like primal fear component is important, but like figuring out ways, and this is ultimately like what the playwright is after also, is like figuring out ways to access that primal fear in like a safe environment.
Yeah. Actually, that monster that you encounter is the other group member from the students. Just remember that. He didn't die. He became this monster. He got effectively died, but he became this monster. So it makes sense then that like they're using the serum now, because that is, you don't have to put someone in a room with a monster to induce this fear anymore. But I believe this is the way that Wakefield eventually does access the veil, is he just goes down in this tunnel with the monster. And then there is a kind of like chase thing where you're running through a bunch of rooms, and then I'm shaky on the details, but if I remember right, suddenly he's in the place with the playwright.
Yeah, I think so.
Could be wrong. I didn't write that down. Should have, but I didn't.
Yeah, and then I think the final chapter takes place in that sort of like in between worlds place.
So you're trying to get to the last door.
Yeah, and this, I mean, like this area is really good for it has this cool sort of rhythm where you go to a location, you do a puzzle, and then your character is like, in the corners I see shadows that reveal, and then it'll do like a flashback to a short scene where one of our previous characters or protagonists is like interacting with an environment that we were in, either as DeVitt or the Doctor, and they're doing the sort of like prequel stuff, which is, I think, a really, really clever way to like sort of revisit those locations and give you a little bit of context.
Yeah, and I like the kind of in-between space as a playable space too. It works really well for like this setting, because for a while I kind of assumed that like you open up the veil and you're immediately in hell, basically. But that's not how it is. There's this inhabitable space. I mean, it's dangerous, and there's this guardian thing trying to keep you away from the last door, but it's not like you enter and immediately lose your mind or immediately get killed by demons.
Right.
There's an inhabitable space in there, which is even more cool and creepy.
And I think this is one of the areas where they really get to have like fun with the visual design of the levels. Like, for a while I found it to be a little bit confusing to navigate, but there's just like stuff like, you know, you'll go from one area that doesn't seem to connect to another area, or there's like a mirror that you pass through that will go into like a reflected version of the room you are just in. And just all sorts of like weird, like cool visuals. Throughout the game, they do a really good job of playing with foreground and background. So oftentimes you can walk into a scene where there's stuff that's like in front of the camera, as well as being background setting. And I think it's really good in this area specifically too.
Yeah. There were a lot of places in this area that seemed impossible, you know, like staircases that are too big and stuff like that. And I really like that, as you're in this in-between space that's halfway in reality and halfway not. Really, really cool. And so this way you actually do have a choice at the end of this. I didn't know that. So what did you do at the end of the game regarding going through the last door or not?
So I chose to go through it, but I almost let the curtain close because I wasn't sure. So, like, I wanted to save DeVitt. Like, I felt bad for him. But, like, the way that the guy, like, words, like, what you're supposed to do or, like, what the choice is a little bit confusing. So, like, I thought he wanted me to go through to stop DeVitt from, like, remaking the world, not to, like, save him, per se, but...
Okay. Yeah, I got the impression that he's still pretty driven by saving DeVitt, whether saving him from himself or just saving him from whatever's in there. Yeah. So I also went in. Also, like, I don't remember it being a choice that I, like, deliberated over. It seemed like a pretty natural thing. Like, I don't think Wakefield would have turned away at that point, but you can. Right. You can just not do it.
It's also one of the only places in the game, I think, where, like, the scene will advance without you. So, like, if you're just seeing the curtain close and, like, mousing around to see interactables, like, there's just one thing that you can do in that room.
And I'm not sure that I like that there's a choice and only one choice in the whole game, basically, right at the end, when you may not even realize there's a choice.
Yeah.
But... whether it's because you are role-playing Wakefield and you want to save DeVitt, or you're a person who's playing a video game and wants to see more video game, you go in the door, right? So, yeah. So you go in, you find DeVitt, and you allow DeVitt to leave, but Wakefield stays behind. I wasn't clear on why he had to stay behind. Did you remember that?
I think the idea is just somebody has to be on the other side so they can close the door.
Yeah, I don't have a good idea. And I'm trying to think of, like, a theory why, you know, because it's not like, it's not a literal door that can only be closed from one side.
Yeah, I suppose you're right.
Someone has to be there, and Wakefield sacrifices himself, basically, which is, you know, a bittersweet little ending, because Wakefield seems like a good dude, and who knows how DeVitt is going to be when he makes it back to the real world.
Well, so I have a question for you about that ending then.
Okay.
So the ending is like him in his apartment. He's like, "Oh, I got to my apartment. I've been away so long. Everything was dusty. You know, I looked out on the rainy streets of London." And then I believe the last thing that he says is like, "I remembered the motto of our group," which is what nobody else can know. Nobody don't know things.
See that no one knows.
Right. Yeah. So do you think the implication is that he then kills himself?
I wouldn't say I got that, but I would say that he's kind of resolved to keep this a secret.
Okay.
Knowing now that someone's there keeping the door shut or something like that, and knowing that he kind of blocked off the playwright from accessing that place now,
Mm-hmm.
that he would be kind of like, this secret dies with me,
Gotcha.
whether it's right now or whenever he dies naturally, I guess.
Okay.
What did you think?
I got the impression that he killed himself, but I also default expect the worst ending possible from every Lovecraft story because that tends to be the way they go. So there would be a certain irony in Wakefield sacrificing himself to save DeVitt, only for DeVitt to then commit suicide once he got back to the real world.
And that would fit too. I mean, not to justify why someone's killing themselves, but in this story, the things that he's arguably seen more than the other characters that committed suicide, that couldn't handle what they had experienced and what pain and stuff they had caused. So that would also make sense. Seems like it would be a hell of a secret to keep for the rest of your natural life. Yeah.
I mean, he's going to write a journal somewhere, and then 10 years later, his grandson is going to come into the apartment and the whole thing starts over again.
The Last Door season 3 set, 60 years in the future. Yeah, that's what people do in this. It's very handy and also very unfortunate that everyone writes down all the terrible things they've done in a journal.
Yeah.
So, were there any other kind of plot beats or I don't know, just flavor things that you enjoyed and wanted to mention?
I not specific plot beats, but as I was playing it, I was really impressed by how holistically it incorporated Lovecraft without actually doing any specific mythos stuff. So there's no Cthulhu, there's no Azathoth, there's none of that. There is a dream world kind of. But they have obviously yellow is an important color in the game. You have the musician who's driven crazy by trying to perfect a single piece of music. All of this stuff that's thematically a part of Lovecraftian mythos without actually making specific references. And I think that's really cool and a neat way to incorporate that.
Yeah. From my understanding, Lovecraft, a lot of the actual Lovecraft stories use artists, right? As the people who are more susceptible or more open to these otherworldly things, right?
Yeah, the idea is that they're more sensitive or whatever because of their creative abilities.
Right. Do you know what? I'm looking this up. I don't remember if they even tell you what DeVitt's job was. He's a professor. Okay.
Yeah.
He teaches philosophy.
That makes sense.
Because of his little Dead Poets Society club. Yeah, I kind of like how there is a monster in this game, and you do get little glimpses of it, but it's not one of the things I really don't like about that Call of Cthulhu video game is that the monster gets out and it just becomes a game about avoiding the monster or dealing with the monster. I think it's the Shambler in that game. Whereas in this game, the monster's there and the threat of the monster is always there, but it's not a game about a monster that you're unleashing or summoning or something like that. And it really like I said before, the thing that I like the most about the Lovecraft mythos, the thing that Lovecraft thought was cool and scary, is this world beyond that should not be uncovered. People uncover it sort of by accident or maybe totally by accident, and then it just breaks them because they can't handle what's there. And I think this game does a great job of that. And not just people see it and instantly go crazy. They see it, they experience it, and different people get affected in different ways. And then that is what kind of drives some of the other people crazy.
Right. Or even just the idea that human history as we know it or we understand it is a complete farce. You know, there are a couple of characters that you get diary entries from that are like, you know, oh, I can't believe that this isn't really what happened, you know, like, how can we have been fooled this whole time kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. The idea that the human world as we know it is not the real world, and that the real world is something that you couldn't possibly comprehend is, very cool. And the motivation for some characters to find that final truth and reshape what we think is the real world, but it's like just a fabrication. You can, if you know the language, the capital L language, you can do what you want with it.
Yeah.
Really cool.
The other thing that I wanted to touch on that I think is impressive, and like, this is not an issue anymore really so much, but like, you know, obviously it's hard to have a conversation about Lovecraft without like mentioning the unfortunate racial undertones to his writing. And while this game does like exclusively deal with white European people, it also completely sidesteps any of the weird like racist undertone, like tribalism, ancient African peoples,
Cults.
whatever. Completely, which is really nice.
The cult members in this game are the white European men, right? It's not these kind of barbarians that some of the cults in the other stories are. Yeah, that's a good point. And I didn't think of it because it's not in the game at all.
Right, yeah.
It's, totally possible to fully understand Lovecraft ideas without including the stuff that doesn't need to be included, right?
Yeah.
So, so in my like limited exposure to Lovecraft stories and stories influenced by Lovecraft, I think this is a very cool depiction, and one that seems to understand the cool things and not just like, isn't Cthulhu crazy? Like, what if Cthulhu attacked? Same with like Darkest Dungeon does a really good job with that too. That same kind of like uncovering ancient things that didn't need to be uncovered, and here's the result. Someone's got to go clean this up. And I just wondered if you felt the same way.
So it's an interesting dichotomy. I think visual media is like really uniquely positioned to capture a lot of like the emotional impact of Lovecraftian horror in a way, at least for me, that like reading it doesn't. But the unfortunate thing about Lovecraftian horror is a big component of it is that like unknown, right? And like you can, in a book, you can have a character say, you know, I glimpsed the ineffable, I saw impossible angles, you know, characters coming from degrees that don't exist. Like that works in the written word, but the trick is then how do you represent that? Which is where a lot of the visual media falls down. But what I like about this is, again, like it represents the ideas and the themes, like kind of in the same way that like Bloodborne does, not obviously like two completely different games gameplay wise, but in terms of like the themes and the ideas and the things that the characters do and the way that they interact with the world feels very typical of Lovecraft protagonists.
It may be one reason why this game succeeds in that, because they don't try to show you too much of stuff that you would maybe be tempted to show because it would be really cool visually. Like it would be really tempting if you're making a game or a movie or something like that to have a really cool Lovecraft monster and have that be a driving force, where, like we talked about earlier, you only see that bird creature one time and you see its eye, and that's it. That's all you get. And then the other monster, the one that the other student turns into, you see that in a couple of scenes too, but it's a very small slice of the game where you're actually dealing with like Lovecraftian visual stuff. The rest of it is a lot of like visuals that suggest that things are not real, or visuals that are meant to scare you and put you off guard and stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good point. I definitely thought like again, with that Call of Cthulhu game, I thought they just relied too much on visual, like, isn't this monster scary? It can phase in and out of the painting. That's creepy. Like, as opposed to kind of the human effect.
Yeah.
Which is like the cooler part, I think. Like, artistic depictions of Cthulhu look cool, but the effects that has on the characters in those stories are way more interesting to me than giant squid monster.
Yeah, I think that's the misunderstanding that a lot of adaptations get, is like the hook of a good Lovecraftian horror story is not the monster, which is kind of, I think, kind of what, especially with the, mythos being expanded by other unrelated authors and stuff, like that's kind of what it's become about, but like that is not, it's so much less of a thing in his actual writing,
And the reason Bloodborne, I think, succeeds in that is the Lovecraftian monsters that you come across don't look like stuff you would be expecting. Right?
Yeah.
They look super weird. They look like its own thing. So, yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And yeah, this has been a really fun conversation, especially the spoiler section was something that, like, I kind of struggled with this game to put together and then deliver a coherent spoiler section. And I really appreciate what you brought to that. And then, your perspective on Lovecraftian media too. So I really appreciate you suggesting this game and then coming on and talking about it with me.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Maybe next year we'll do not a scary game. I don't want to typecast myself too much.
Yeah, that's true. Let's we'll definitely have you back on the show sometimes. It's always a good time talking games with you. Thanks again, Jamie.
Yeah, of course.
And thanks everybody for listening. Tune in next week for the last game of Spooky Month, which is The Quarry, if you listened this far. But everyone knows, if you've seen the schedule announcements, The Quarry's coming up next. And then I'll be out of horror games for a couple weeks at least. So thank you so much again for listening. Tune in next week for the next game that comes out of the backlog.